Hey Trails Collective, Ian here with a review of Scott's Kinabalu Ultra RC, a model I was really stoked about and to put some miles into. So it has a great blend of responsive cushioning, a rock plate that I actually don't mind, and fairly smooth lugs which make it pretty versatile. So I love the weight, I love the design, smooth underfoot feel, but are those upsides enough to basically justify the price point? And is it a model that can handle Beast Coast trails? Let's dig in.
'Cause I wanna be like the wind, I wanna run with you. We can be wolves, howling at the prey white moon. I wanna be by your side when we light up the sky for the world to see. Run, 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 run with me.
So, specs. For those of you who've taken in some of my reviews in the past, you know I tend to be fairly thorough, and specs is right up in there. I feel like the angle of stack heights is something where I'm not getting consistent measures out of companies, if not doubting some of the specs that we're getting. And for those who are just repeating them without really digging in, well, I wanted to be more accurate. So, stack heights. Insole, 4 millimeters. In the heel, 3 millimeters in the forefoot. Lasting estimate to the inside of the shoe or a strobel board in there, probably around 2 millimeters. Midsole estimate around 19 millimeters in the heel. Base rubber of 2 millimeters. Lugs 4 millimeters. So I caliper it in for a combined stack height at 31 millimeters in the heel and 23 in the forefoot for a drop of 8 millimeters. Note, on the drop with Scott, and we'll get into it on the midsole platform, they're using an E-ride configuration in their midsole, which makes the angle of the drop a little bit different. And I'll talk about that here in a second. The weight of the shoe, 9.5 ounces or 270 grams in a men's size 9. Price, $160.
Damn!
Let's take you into it from the upper, from the top down, starting with the upper. Upper, they use an engineered mesh, breathes well, drains well, TPU overlays for added support, particularly in off-camber surfaces. The TPU overlays, particularly down the midfoot, I think do a pretty effective job at providing midsole or midfoot rather support, which accentuates the contour of the midsole pretty well. Fairly traditional padded heel collar and what feels like a thermoplastic cup on the inside. Tongue, engineered mesh below, and has some padding run underneath the top laces for protection. Laces themselves sit pretty flat, which makes it nice over the laces, or the tongue rather, and haven't had any issues with them coming untied. One thing of note that I did experience with the upper, and particularly the tongue, whereas, and I'll get into in a second, I feel like rock plates are often overrated and unnecessary in trail shoes. Something that I think is fairly necessary in a trail shoe is a gusseted tongue. Scott and the RC here did not use a gusseted tongue, and what you can see, probably even dropping down there, is just debris from some of the more recent miles. I think it's really easy to integrate a gusseted tongue and have it be pretty smooth, so that's something I'd like to see change in the next round. They have two holes cut into the padded portion of the upper tongue to keep the tongue in place, which works pretty well, and tapers off right around the top of the instep. Historically, I had some issues with the taper of Scott's design being a little too aggressive for my forefoot, and I'd get a little bit of rub right around the fifth metatarsal. This model, I feel like it has enough depth where I don't get that. So, pretty nice design. I changed the tongue. Getting into the, let's start with the insole as we approach into the midsole. Nice, I think they call it maybe their racing insole. Nothing too remarkable. Adds a little bit of cushioning and is hydrophobic, which I think is necessary for a trail shoe where it just doesn't really take or hold on to the water like some other models do. You getting down into the midsole. I've always liked the Scott's choice in midsole materials. I feel like they are nicely technical and unique. One of the, break with a little bit of history. So I carried Scott for a number of years, up until a couple years ago when they pulled out of the US market. I was pretty bummed. I thought at first that they were just pulling out of run altogether, but then I noticed they were still invested in sponsoring quite a few events in the European or Asian markets and putting out some pretty slick product. So I was really stoked when I found out this past year that the singular owner said they have to re-enter the US market. So I was really stoked to get some of these on my feet and back in the equation. And so historically, when I was carrying them, they were using a midsole foam called Aerofoam that they pulled out of the aerospace industry. It was light, it was responsive, it felt soft under the foot, and the compression set was really quite solid. They moved up to the what they call kinetic foam with their some of their newer models. In theory, the kinetic foam, I think, is roughly 14% more responsive and durable than a traditional EVA. I think that's a little bit of word salad that a lot of companies are using, in the sense of not many companies are just using traditional EVA anymore. If they are using EVA, they term it high quality EVA. For instance, in the case of the Topo Mountain Racer on my foot here, which I don't necessarily know what that means. I guess it's just a different blend of EVA. But in theory, the kinetic foam is just more durable than a traditional set. What I do like is the kinetic foam feels good, just like the Aero foam did. It's light, it's soft, yet it's responsive, gives me good ground feel, and I'm assuming it's going to be fairly durable. So kudos to that kinetic foam, really like it. So the shaping of the midsole and with that kinetic foam, Scott's signature mechanic is a chassis that they term E-Ride. E-Ride is basically going after creating more stability for various stride mechanics. So when you look at the shoe and tease it out, there's a very gradual S shape to the midsole. And what's happening is here, if somebody's coming down with a fairly, with heel contact first, they're trying to position the shoe into the first S curve to hit and make more contact with the midfoot. Once you get to midfoot, they're basically extending that midfoot design. I think it's roughly 30% forward in the shoe to create a stable midfoot pattern. From there, it starts dropping off. And where I mentioned this is applicable with the stack heights is, even though the shoe has a relative drop of 8, what's happening in this here is the stack heights that are here will go from that 31 or whatever it is in that heel, stays fairly consistent a little bit further forward before it drops to a relative offset of 4 and then 2 at the forefoot. And it is really noticeable, the E-Ride. It creates, I think, a bit of forefoot propulsion because it's basically allowing you to follow that S contour and really drop off. And you really do feel it. Taking it down, outsole rubber. Nothing too remarkable in terms of the blend. I don't think there's any specific trade names. What you do have is a fairly non-technical outsole configuration. This model, and in Scott's, I think, phrasing, it's a model that's really designed for racing a race like Western States 100. It's designed to go long, it's designed to feel fast, but it's not overly technical. And that's pretty critical on understanding who the shoe is designed for. So looking at the outsole, it has a fairly traditional chevron configuration here, but in my experience, it doesn't really have enough really to bite on particularly wet or muddy conditions, and I'll mention that more here in a second. The lugs do space out or fan a little bit more as you get closer to the toe. It's pretty slight. In theory, it's allowing you to grip or claw back a little bit more on the ascents, and not too remarkably different in the heel. One thing that's missing here is virtually no traction or lug set right in the midfoot. In theory, designed to have it not hang on to mud, and I guess it would probably do that. But similar to some other models that have used it, you won't be able to see it here, but above my head is the Nike Kiger. Also, not really any traction in the midfoot, as well as some of the other models out there. What this combination, oh, and then also wedged in there, which you can see in the gray slits in the brakes and the outsole foam, or outsole rubber rather, is an ESS rock plate. It's enhanced surface strength, and it's basically unexpanded vinyl, I believe. And historically, I've not been a big fan of rock plates. I think that they're overutilized in trail shoes, partly because people just think that it rock plate needs to be in there for it to be a technical trail shoe. As long as the shoe has adequate stack height, which most trail shoes have, it's really overkill to feel like you need a plate in there. Some of the models that I've worn, the one just ahead of this in the review set was the Topo Ultra Venture Pro. This model also uses a 4-foot rock plate using ESS. The combination with a stiffer chassis with basically just firmer midsole material, harder outsole rubber in the Vibram, and then stacking an ESS plate in there, this just has a really firm, if not hard and stiff forefoot. So depending on how you're setting the ESS rock plate into a shoe really makes a difference. In the case of the Kinabalu Ultra RC, I think it does offer adequate protection paired with the reduced stack height in the midfoot, and it still feels fairly soft and fairly pliable. So I don't mind it actually at all in this shoe. So that's a pretty nice design and integration. What is an issue, and which I feel like will be somewhat of a deal breaker for a lot of us on the Beast Coast, is just that outsole. For me, a lot of my runs based in upstate New York, in Ithaca, New York, we've got quite a bit of trails, but going right from the house, I'm mixing in a combination of hard pack, whether it be roads or cinder trail, and then getting into technical single track. And I need a shoe that really can do it all, or at least I like a shoe that can do it all and also hold up to all that. Within about 75 or 80 miles into this outsole rubber, I've shaved off the heel outsole lug on both fairly, I think, quickly. If I got into maybe 125 miles into this shoe, I'm betting that outsole lug would just be gone. And that just shows me that it's a soft, non-durable rubber. So for some looking at this shoe for a crossover model where it's designed to take non-technical trails, well, outsole rubber doesn't really hold up to it. Another breaking point is here, at least in the Northeast, in addition to technical terrain, we've got mud. And so when I'm out there on an off-camber surface, and I'll play a clip here, really I was just looking to test the ability of the upper to hold my foot in an off-camber surface. It does really well in that regard. But in that clip, I basically started sliding down a slope, and I continued to slide out of that video footage maybe, I don't know, another 10 feet or so, just a free slide down that slope before I was able to catch some roots. And actually I had a hard time getting back up the slope just because this outsole rubber, it just wouldn't bite. If in the context of some of those slopes and some of the technical terrain or even the mud that I put it in, if the slope or if the terrain had an amount of grit in it, the shoe would grab a bit. But if it was fairly just smooth mud of any depth, it just slides right off the trail. So for somebody that needs a versatile shoe and handling Beast Coast conditions, kind of a deal breaker there. Yeah, so taking you through some of the comparisons, I think in my testing experience, probably one of the closest matches is the Brooks Catamount. Brooks Catamount with the DNA Flash Foam, I feel like is giving you a little bit more bounce and responsivity to the midsole foam blend. I prefer the upper on the Ultra RC. The Brooks Catamount, also a shoe that's designed to run long, their Ultra version over only semi-technical trails. I think it does a pretty poor job of holding the foot over the base when you get on an off-camber surface. I think the Ultra RC does a much better job holding the midfoot. Neither outsole rubber is overly sticky, potentially going in the direction of the Brooks Catamount with the lug configuration, but it's really splitting hairs at this point. Two really similar shoes, similar price points as well. If I had to really decide between the two, I'd probably go, well, it really would be a toss-up. You'd probably want to try them both on your feet. Another one that I was curious about comparing it to was the Skechers Speed Trail. And just because Skechers is using a rocker bottom platform configuration as well, has a fairly similar grab, probably a little less volume in the Skechers Speed Trail. Outsole rubber of the Speed Trail, probably a little bit stickier, a little bit more durable than what Scott's using, but a little bit more protection, and I feel like I could run probably longer in the Ultra RC than I could in the Speed Trail. Speed Trail also uses an H-frame configuration of their hard plate in the forefoot, and that just ends up, I think, feeling fairly hard and stiff. I like what they're doing with the ESS plate a little bit better. Another one that I was curious in comparing it to that I also reviewed this year was the Innovate Graphene G270. Fairly similar stack height profile, but this one just comes in with a 0-drop platform as opposed to the 8-drop of the RC. Much stickier rubber, much more durable rubber in the G270 for a similar price point shoe. Both of them I feel like I could run long. G270 I feel like handles Beast Coast. Ultra RC, not so much. So there will be a couple. Another one that's going to be in the rotation, which I'm pretty excited about, is the SuperTrack RC2. This is more of their big mountain shoe, more aggressive outsole profile, more closed off mesh on the upper. This one to me feels like it runs a half size small. So the model that I received to test, I don't think I'm going to be able to test it, so I'm waiting for the half size up, and then I'll get into it, put on some miles, and let you know how it goes. So, Scott, you have a slick shoe here in the Kinabalu Ultra RC. Really like the aesthetics. I really like the feel underfoot. I just don't think it quite holds up to Beast Coast, and tough to justify at that $160 price point. For those of you who aren't running as technical terrain, can keep it on fairly soft ground, and want to run long in a snappy, responsive shoe, definitely check out the Kinabalu Ultra RC. I think the only account literally in the US at the moment who might stock it is Seven Hills Running out of Seattle and Washington. So shout out to the crew there. We will probably bring in here at the Trails Collective and the Finger Lakes Running Company a couple of the Scott models. I'm waiting for the Kinabalu model, which updates in March, for that to come out, to bring that in as well. So stay tuned for that, and I'm excited to also test that out. So thanks for tuning in for this gear review. For sure, comment in the comment section if you have any questions. I'll try to be responsive. Appreciate all you can do to share these reviews. Check us out on Facebook, like our channel here on YouTube, and stay tuned for our, depending on when you catch this, New Year's Eve episode coming up December 31st, live show from 7:30 to 10. All right, thanks so much. Catch you next round. See ya.